There were 10.
Welcome back. That was an interesting reading, but I don't know if these guys are postmodern. They're postmodern socially to me. I don't know if they're postmodern in terms of literature, but
They're wearing black.
they are that. First, I'll say, does anybody have any questions or comments? Would like to dig into one of these dudes and their Glenn?
The cover. Whose idea was it to make it glow in the dark?
Whose idea was it to make it glow in the dark? I wish I could take credit because I think the idea and the execution are pretty sublime. It was the team at Forest Arts and Giroux. I think it was Rodrigo Corral who he definitely designed the cover, and I think he also brought the idea of glow in the dark ink to the table. And man, props to them, for taking the time and just expending the imaginative capacity to make the physical edition something that's like worth remarking upon and not just another printed book.
Now I want to cut the lights. I actually haven't seen it in the dark.
Does it really glow in the dark?
It glows in the dark. It glows in the dark.
Yeah.
And I have to say that the real delight of that has been that, of course, some people hear that it glows in the dark and they think that's cool and they pick it up. Many people have bought the book without a clue, and invariably you hear these stories, you see people's tweets like, okay, so I finished reading and put it aside and turned off the lights, and it freaked me out!
Generally, in terms of marketing, people don't buy books in the dark, but
It's a surprise.
what exactly it would do. I don't know, hold it up. I don't know.
It definitely needs to be pretty dark to see the effect. But if it's on your bedside table and the lights are all out and you're falling asleep, you'll see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you've already bought it.
Well, it's bonus.
I don't get the idea. I used to do, well, anyway,
But
all right.
you never forget.
I wanted to see a cover with the ladder, but what do I know? Anybody else have a comment or question? This guy.
Since that was for Rob, and I'll ask Austin a question. So both you and your brother write, and I'm an only child. And so I'm just kind of curious, when you were growing up, did you both want to be writers? Was it some kind of Bronte sisters thing you had going there?
I think he actually did want to be a writer. It honestly never occurred to me that I would want to do that. It's such a dismal profession. Yeah, that's sort of funny. He wanted to be a writer, and I think he knew that certainly by high school and college, and then he started writing right out the gate. And I waited until I was 32 to even start properly writing Soon I Will Be Invincible. And that's odd. And our parents are writers as well.
We are?
Oh yeah, it's
Genetic.
dreadful.
Genetic. For people who don't know, his twin brother is Vin Diesel. One thing that struck me kind of interestingly was, one thing that struck me was both these guys gave us, in picking out some of the book, that gave you really a sense of where the book was going to go, And particularly in Robin's, I thought, I love the way, I thought Robin drew on a very deep vein in science fiction and fantasy. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? The Little Shop Story, And I was very much reminded of, not in fact a Little Shop Story, but The Circus of Dr. Lau, where you have, it's an ancient trope in science fiction where when I was a kid, I remember one of the most amazing things I ever read was The Circus of Dr. Lau, a traveling carnival full of mythological creatures and stuff. So I love the way he did that and tied it into totally modern science fiction, San Francisco, totally modern guy looking for a job, and all this and Craigslist and everything else. And then basically I felt like you walk in, I thought that was kind of cool.
Well, I have to tell you, I was as much in some ways a reader or a recipient of that feeling as I was ultimately the author of it, because the this true story. The initial seed for this novel was a tweet, and I can remember so vividly. Not even a tweet that I wrote. I cribbed it. I remember so vividly. I was walking in San Francisco. It was the year 2008, the end of 2008, and my friend Rachel tweeted, "Just misread a sign that said 24-hour book drop as 24-hour book shop. My disappointment is beyond words," which I thought was pretty funny, totally resonated. But, I mean, from that moment, I kind of went, oh man, 24-hour bookshop, that sounds like a terrible idea. What is going on inside a 24-hour bookshop? And I wrote it down and stewed on it, and it became a short story that became a novel. So that curiosity, it runs pretty deep.
Yeah, that can happen. Anybody else have a, yes, please.
This is for both of them. What's it like writing your first book?
What?
What's it like writing your first book?
It's a slightly more fresh experience for me than for Austin, so I'll go first. And I will be totally candid. I think in large part because so much of my writing in the past had been on the internet, in sort of short form, right? We're talking blog posts and tweets, short stories. When I sort of sat down to write short stories, that was like really reaching for me. One of the most basic experiences of writing my first novel was the question, can I write a whole novel? You know, I think other writers actually don't have that problem. They're like, I can write 400,000 words in a row, I just don't know if they're going to be any good, or how am I going to pare it down into something coherent or comprehensible. For me, it was like, is it in me to write something, you know, of that magnitude? But I think that has a lot to do with kind of where you come from and where you start.
It's a good question. I mean, it seemed like a thing that could not be done. I had never written anything longer than seven pages, and I had just gotten to graduate school. I was, I believe, 32, so I was not one of those irritating young scribblers. And I started to write these short stories, which I wrote in longhand, and I was writing about superheroes because I was sort of still obsessed with Watchmen, and I never got over it. I'm sorry. And there wasn't going to be a new Watchmen. All right, and then now there is, and it's too bad. But okay, so I needed to write my own, and I was going to write it in prose because I couldn't draw. And I wrote some short stories, and I wrote some more short stories, and I was either a very repetitive short story writer or I was writing a novel. But I tried not to let myself in on the idea that I was writing a novel because it was simply too hard. I told myself I was writing consecutive issues of a series of comic books, which seemed like the way to. I mean, I'm not totally dumb. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to. Most of the time, I kept that thought out of my head as much as possible. It's quite difficult. I mean, I'm sure it's easier for some people that I despise. It's quite difficult and daunting. And I wrote mine over 6 years, and I didn't try to write it all at once. So I would say, if it feels hard, don't let that discourage you, is what I would say, because it felt beyond hard.
And that was the Indelible Man, right?
That was soon I will be invincible.
Soon I will be in Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I had a question off of that really struck me when you were talking about games versus the real world, where you talked about you call it the narrative channel, and I remember do people remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a thing called Choose Your Own Adventure.
Oh, yeah.
And and I actually tried to write one of those, And of course, you can, the real problem is how you limit rather than how you open, because, And in your thing about that, I may have missed part of it, but you were talking about in a game, could you read that little section about the narrative channel again?
Right. In a normal game, you couldn't do it. The world is a narrative channel, a single story that you can follow but never escape. But at some point, sooner or later, but usually very, very soon, the world just runs out of stories you can tell. And every time you run into that point, there's a jarring, illusion-breaking bump that tells you it's just a game.
So where's the is the narrative channel in the real world or in the game?
Well, it's in story. I think it's in the Choose Your Own Adventure novels. To me, it's like being in the scene, and it's like it's offering me two choices, but there's a third option that I want to do, and I can't do it. Right?
In the real world.
Oh, in the real world. In the real world, there's no. Obviously, there's no limit. But you don't want the real world. You want the game.
But that's. So you're saying well, it's like I was talking about the Choose Your Own Adventure. You might have 3 or 4, but you can't have
right. You can't have
infinite.
Right. Exactly.
But in the real world, the novel is made. In the real world, there's very few choices. I mean, isn't that the sense of the novel? How narrative actually works? You only get your choices are so limited.
My problem with the real world is that your choices have so many consequences.
That's why they're called choices.
It's funny though. I actually think that Choose Your Own Adventures and the feeling you get from them are very resonant with Austin's book. I don't know if anyone else had this experience of reading Choose Your Own Adventures, where you didn't actually choose, you just stuck fingers in the pages, so you'd end up reading with like all your fingers in the pages of this book in this weird branching sort of. So you'd like make the wrong choice or a boring choice. Oh no, I didn't want to do that one. So you actually didn't want to make a choice. You wanted to. It's like you said, like you wanted it all. You wanted to experience all these stories somehow and just like suck them all up. I don't know. It's weird.
All right, I still don't. Hey, it struck me the narrative channel was a fairly good definition of the process of writing in itself. You know, because you're in. I think the further you get into a novel, in particular, the narrower the narrative channel gets. You know, because you have your character has choices and you have choices you want to do, but the novel is about narrowing them down.
Well, I have a question for the table, which is: do you outline a novel or a story before you write it, or do you write it discovering how the story goes as you go?
I would say it was a mix. Definitely not the you hear legends of sort of diagrams and things on graph paper that are all perfectly sketched out, and it's not that. But I guess for me, it's also not the story of, well, I don't know, the characters just decided to go to Antigua, so I followed along. It was not that either. There is planning, and there is a sense of like, well, I want him to get there. I want to do this, and this. So it's some sort of mix.
What about for you?
Well, for me, it's kind of, it is actually sort of, it is nearly all improvised, you know, because if I know how the story comes out in advance, I lose my impetus to write it a little bit. I write to kind of discover what's going to happen. And certainly there were definitely some events at the end of Soon I'll Be Invincible that totally surprised me by the end. But my brother outlines the whole thing. He's just like, oh, see, I got my novels right here. And he shows me the 3 pages of everything that happens. It's infuriating.